If you haven't watched part 1 on the mysterious Spanish get, I do recommend you do so. That said, let's continue. We ended part 1 discussing why the standalone get and the phrasal get should not be considered when translating your English to Spanish. They only lead to problems. However, as I mentioned earlier, the standalone non-predicative get and the phrasal get are just 2 of 4 forms of get we will look at in these 2 videos, and it is through the other 2 forms we see get start to emerge in our Spanish. I want you to consider other ways we use get in English, ways we construct slightly more complex grammatical structures with the verb get. First, we're going to look at the get passive. The get passive is another way in English we express the passive voice. See my video on the Spanish passive voice for a more complete look at how the passive voice is constructed in Spanish. In English, the passive voice is constructed with the verb be plus the past participle. Be here can be conjugated. For instance, the bridge was built last year. Or the houses were painted this month. In English, we can replace the verb be with the verb get to create what is called the get passive. This is get plus the past participle. So as you can see, this is not an expression of get as a standalone non-predicative lexical verb sitting by itself in the sentence. It's also not get with a little particle next to it that creates the phrasal verb. This is get as part of a slightly more complex grammatical structure. Get plus a past participle. And what I want to emphasize here is, it is through these larger grammatical structures we can start to conceptualize the word get in our Spanish. Within the get passive, get is used as an auxiliary verb, acting in place of the verb be to create the passive voice. The get passive in English describes a change of state or an event or action that happens to the subject. Look at the following sentences. She got fired yesterday. He got injured in the football game. The glasses got broken. We can say all these sentences using the verb be as well. She was fired yesterday. He was injured in the football game. The glasses were broken. In Spanish, the passive voice can be constructed using ser plus the past participle. La casa fue construido en 2020. The house was built in 2020. But this example can also express the get passive. The house got built in 2020. Another and far more common way to express the passive voice in Spanish is using se with the verb in the third person singular or the third person plural. La casa se construyó en 2020. El libro se escribió en el siglo XVII. This is the common way we use the passive voice in Spanish when we don't need to know the cause or the agent doing the action. For instance, in our example, I don't need to mention the agent that did the action. I don't care to mention who built the house. The house got built. When I do want to mention the cause or the agent of the action, I would use the ser plus the past participle form. El libro fue escrito por Cervantes. But what's important here is the get passive can be conceptualized in both forms. And this is a way the word get starts to appear in our Spanish translations. However, there is a bit of a problem here. The passive voice in Spanish, whether the ser plus participle or se plus third person plural or singular is limited to the third person plural or singular. Unlike with English, Spanish speakers don't use the passive voice with I, you, we, or you plural. They don't say yo fui llamado or tú fuiste llamado ayer. Spanish speakers would use the active construction. Ellos te llamaron ayer. They called you yesterday. Or ella me llamó ayer. She called me yesterday. That is, I can express the third person singular, the house got built, or the third person plural, the houses got built, but I cannot express the passive voice in the first person or second person singular or plural. This limits our options a bit with regard to the use of the get passive in our translations. So what can we do if we want to express the get passive in the first or second person singular or plural in our Spanish translations? We can use what is called the accidental se. The accidental se is used in Spanish to express an unintentional action, an accident. The accidental se is constructed by using se plus the indirect object pronoun plus the verb in the third person singular or plural. This is always a tricky thing for native English speakers because of the way the accidental se is constructed. It takes time to understand the complexity of this particular structure. You must learn never to try and directly translate this structure word for word, because if you do, it will sound odd in English. Look at the following sentence. Se me cayó el café. The direct translation would make it sound something like, the coffee fell itself from me. But with time and practice, this construction becomes the slightly more comprehensible, the coffee fell from me, and later, the understandable, I dropped the coffee accidentally. It falling from me indicates that it wasn't my intention. And this brings us back to the passive get. Se me cayó el café could also be understood as the coffee got spilled. This get passive also expressing the unintentional action. Look at this sentence. Se me rompió el brazo. This would sound bizarre as my arm broke itself. But through the lens of the get passive, my arm got broken starts to make sense. I didn't mean for this to happen. But what makes the accidental se so interesting with regard to its relation to the get passive in English is that I can use any indirect object pronoun here. This allows for the English get passive to move out of the Spanish passive voice's strict third-person singular and plural limitations. Se me manchó el abrigo, my coat got stained, can easily be expressed as se te manchó el abrigo, your coat got stained. Se le manchó el abrigo works just as well, his or her coat got stained. Le here representing the indirect object pronoun his or her. Look at se nos volaron los papeles. We got our papers blown away. Or se les quemó la cena. Your dinner got burnt. In this case, the you plural form. I could also use the se os quemó la cena if we're in Spain. The point here is, I can use an approximation of the get passive for the first person, second person, and third person, singular or plural by using the accidental se. Now let's turn to what is probably the most common example of the English get finding its way into your Spanish translations. This is what we will refer to as the change of state get plus adjective. Keep in mind, this is not a grammatically accepted category in English, but in my opinion, it's the best way to approach this subject. And this consists of get followed by an adjective. Get in this construction is basically standing in for the verb become. This is just get plus an adjective. Let's look at 4 adjectives: tired, worried, involved, obsessed. I can add get to the adjective to create the change of state, get plus the adjective in English. She got tired at work. He got worried. We got involved in the process. I got obsessed with the film. All of these work just as well if I replace get with become. In Spanish, this get plus the adjective form of get is expressed through pronominal verbs, specifically a subcategory of pronominal verbs called change of state pronominal verbs. There are 3 different uses of the pronominal verb. One is expressing a reflexive action that one does to oneself. Ella se lava las manos. Ellos se cepillan el pelo. Another use is to express a reciprocal action. For instance, ellos se abrazan or ellos se besan. This is expressing the equivalent of the English each other. The other use of a pronominal verb in Spanish is the use that's most important to our discussion today. We call this category of pronominal verbs change of state pronominal verbs. This is a transformation of a psychological, emotional, or physical state. Understanding the difference between these 3 particular uses of a pronominal verb is crucial for our Spanish comprehension. If we look at a change of state pronominal verb like enojarse, ella se enojó, this is indicating an emotional shift, a change in her mood. This can also be seen in a pronominal verb like despertarse. Él se despertó a las 7. This is a transformation from one state to another, a state of sleep to a state of being awake. He gets tired at work. Él se cansa en el trabajo. They got lost yesterday. Ellos se perdieron ayer. We got involved in the conversation. Nosotros nos involucramos en la conversación. Do you see how these verbs in both languages are expressing a process of change of state, whether an emotion, a physical state, or a psychological state? This is how you differentiate them from the reciprocal or the reflexive forms of the pronominal verb in Spanish. And it is also the form that is most closely associated with the English get plus adjective. For years, these change of state pronominal verbs baffled me. I thought, why are they using reflexive pronouns if they're not expressing the idea of doing something to oneself or each other? But once I started to think about the English get plus adjective, it all fell into place. Me enfermo en el invierno. I get sick in winter. Él se confundió. He got confused. Ella se embarazó. She got pregnant. Nosotros nos avergonzamos cuando llegamos tarde. we got embarrassed when we arrived late. In conclusion, to understand how we can conceptualize the verb get in Spanish, we must first understand the 4 grammatical forms of get we looked at. Once we understand the 4, we realize the stand-alone non-predicative get and the phrasal get should not be considered when translating get into your Spanish. Search for the more specific verb you want to use. Where we see get start to show up in Spanish is in the more complex structures with get. We looked at the get passive, which is essentially the Spanish passive voice. Remember, a similar idea to the get passive can also be expressed with the accidental se in Spanish. We also have the get plus adjective change of state get, which we can find expressed through change of state pronominal verbs in Spanish. I hope this video has helped you gain a better understanding of the verb get in Spanish. Thanks for watching.